Hey everybody, and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program RP-0. We are out on the launch pad very briefly as we've got to resupply Rosalina Memorial Station on the surface of the moon and hopefully get enough fuel up there to get our crew out for rotation. The rest of the infrastructure I was working on isn't quite ready yet. That's really my fault for not prioritizing builds, etc., etc. But it's about time for them to come home, either which way around it. So we're going to zip through a whole lot of this because it's happened about 50 times. So I will pick all of you up shortly. And we are off. DN2BX performing flawlessly, or at least our ground launch stage is. So yeah, I've sped this up a whole lot so that we can get as quickly to other things as we can. So our core stage gets us in orbit, and we basically just fire up our RL-10 stage with its useless radiators because it doesn't have the runtime to do the job that I need it to do, but we're waiting on upgrades. That'll put us on course to the moon. We will time warp out there after having shut down one of our engines, and then burn to capture into orbit, which results in 2 engine failures and a somewhat decent wait to get to periapsis to shut down the appropriate engine so that we can complete the burn and put ourselves into an orbit, and then a good long while of waiting for the Rosalina Memorial Station, to be underneath us before making our landing approach. And it is an approach I am particularly proud of because it was fairly efficient anyway. It did result in more fuel being delivered to Rosalina Memorial Station than any other supply run I've ever done. Which is great, and we're kind of operating at the capacity for this landing pod, which is odd, but it brings me to the realization that it is really just not quite good enough. So even after touching down, or making our approach, as I should say, is we'll slow down our sped up footage so that you can see my fantastic single approach landing with absolutely 0 mistakes made whatsoever. Yeah, no, I'm not actually building you up to something. This did actually go quite well. I didn't slam it into anything or break the RTG mount or headbutt a Kerbal with this one. So it actually turned out really, really well. I just missed my mark here in the post-recording. But we will slowly make our adjustments. I guess this can be done a lot more efficiently if you come in lower and just bring yourself to a stop horizontally over the station, and then you'll need a little bit of landing burn, but not something quite this squirrely, although I was really just trying to get my descent profile lined up. Finally, after like 50,000 of these, have a method that kind of works, and ironically, it works real well for docking too. If you've seen any of my recent docking attempts during a live stream, I had one that went super smooth, so I'll never ever be able to repeat it ever again. Anyway, as I was mentioning before, we actually do have, I think, the entire top tank of this locked away. So we're still operating with about 600 meters per second of our actual designated fuel, not just our shipment fuel, available to us, which is well more than enough then to land this thing. So we'll actually land with a full supply plus a little bit extra, which makes me extraordinarily happy, because that does actually give me the operational capabilities of this resupply pod. I think grand total the whole thing comes in at like 50 tons, maybe. And there's the base coming up very quickly below us, so we'll start to make our last little bits of correction burn. Of course, I am quite technically on the wrong side, and with signal delay I forgot to get the gear out, put it out, brought it back, and then put it out again. And there is touchdown. There's touchdown. Perfect. We are well within range, and so we will ramp up our speddy uppy bits just a bit more as we get our engineer Laura Douglas out of the lander where she was camped out, recovering from her extraordinarily long drive across the lunar surface. We have, of course, reattached the rover to the base so that we could get the fuel out of it, and top it off. Anyway, so we will be doing our grandiose transfer of resources. We'll start off with the life support stuff. We weren't really in dire need of this, but really I was just trying to refuel the Lunar Uber so that we could get it back to orbit and get this crew cycled home, because it's about time for them to be done here. Although there's still lots and lots and lots of data to research, I think we should probably bring them back and start getting them trained up for a Mars deployment, which would be next on their itinerary. Serve your year on the space station, serve your year on the moon, and then go serve 5 years at Mars. Good thing none of them have a family. Anyway, life support's transferred over, and now it was time to transfer over the fuel. But just to see how much more we have to go, we will disconnect the lander from the base itself, drain off all of its waste stuff, 1600 meters per second. This whole supply run netted us maybe 400 or 500 meters per second. That's not going to cut it. So we will jump back into the VAB, because obviously even if our supply pod operating at its optimal capacity isn't quite enough to get the job done, we're just going to have to build a bigger resupply pod. And so we will first check off how much life support we can bring in. If we size this up, we can get about 244 days for 4 Kerbals. That's not bad. Really, if we make it plenty big, then we can space out the resupply a whole lot, but I guess the primary thing we need to bring down is fuel. And to do this, we're going to employ our brand new experimental lander engine, as you saw in the last episode. Multiple ignitions, throttleable. It just doesn't have a very long runtime, so we're going to really have to time this well to make it work. We'll stick with the traditional aesthetic. The good news here is that we can utilize balloon tanks for a lot of this. Because the engine has its own turbo pump, it does not need to be pressure fed. Huge advantage there, because we can save a whole lot of mass throughout the entirety of the spacecraft. And this, as it sits, will give us 6.2 kilometers per second, which is great, but that's burning off everything that it has and not actually taking any fuel down. If we lock the top tank, it gets down to below 2 grand. But if we lock the legs, we can stay at right around 3,000 meters per second or so. We're actually going to cut a lot of the life support out of that, because we can use the smaller pods. They'll keep them on station. Like 2 resupplies a year is about all they need from those. It does need a battery, however, because not using the Agena core, we actually need an external battery for this control core. It's rated for 150 tons, however. I was hoping to keep it a little under that, so that we could save money on a launch vehicle. But it's already looking like it's going to be DN5 or bust for this one. But we do need some spacers for these solar panels. That is one hungry control core after all. And we'll just touch them up. Yep, looks like we've got plenty of clearance. And with the resizing, we're up to 7.2 kilometers per second. That's not that bad. We'll actually go ahead and scale this up a little bit more, because we are only at about 60 some odd tons. So we have a lot of room that we can grow. So we'll size up our primary tanks. Not bad, 7.6 kilometers per second. We can go ahead and size up our leg tanks a little bit and tuck those back. Yeah, 8.04 kilometers per second. Hopefully this will give us the deliverable oomph that we need to get our crew back to orbit. So anyway, that's going to do it for this episode, everyone. Thank you so much for hanging out. I really do appreciate it, and I will see all of you in the next one. So until then, see you later.